Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call a game about a region-wide war between magical forest creatures where the beavers are trying to take over the whole world?
I don't know.
Shadow of the Dam! Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
These titles this week are just like too long and dumb to come up with a good joke, host Madelyn.
I'm gonna slide right off your brain, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. This week, we're talking about Shadows of the Damned. Maybe you picked that up from the joke. And Immortals of Aveum. Sometimes I think that you actually secretly curate
I do not.
the hat polls.
But we do have the the
big
EA
Games Flops week here at Talk This.
The EA Magic Touch week.
The EA sure knows how to market a game.
Yeah. No, it's a very much a coincidence.
Sure, that's what she says.
I didn't know anything about Shadows of the Damned, really, when I pulled it out of the hat, so... And what I knew about Immortals of Aveum was... Wow, I sure don't know anything about this.
So we learned a lot this week, and hopefully, listener, you will too. So Shadows of the Damned, if you weren't familiar with it, I mentioned that I thought for sure this would be a game that like boyfriend would have played as a teenager. You know what I mean? But no, not big enough. It was a 2011 third-person shooter action-adventure situation from Grasshopper Entertainment, who
Manufacturer.
You know, what?
Grasshopper Manufacturer.
Why did I write Grasshopper Entertainment?
I have no idea, Mel.
My brain short-circuited. Maybe it was a mashup with EA, is what I was thinking. Thank you. Grasshopper Manufacturer, best known as the company of Suda51.
Yes, we haven't talked about. Oh no, we did his visual novel.
Silver Case.
We did the Silver Case. We did No More Heroes a while ago. But yeah, Suda51 joint, sort of.
Published by EA, which will become very relevant for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Yes, in 2011. And this one's a collab. It's a collab between Suda51 and legendary producer Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil and Dino Crisis fame. He's the producer, Suda51's the writer, and they decided to combine, as they said, their punk rock and psychological action thriller styles into Shadows of the Damned.
Yeah, sort of.
Yes, really into darkness, but then it became Shadows of the Damned.
Yeah, they definitely marketed this as a Shinji Mikami Suda51 like collaboration, but I think it was directed by Massimo Guarini. I'm sorry, not by either of them. And EA as a publisher had a lot of oversight in the pre-production period for this game as well.
Yeah. It was one of EA's first times working with Japanese developers, and as they put it, the developers, they were like, it seems like EA maybe felt like they should have gotten involved a little earlier once they realized what was going on.
Well, it's just interesting because it seems like they were like, yeah, make this game, except we love your idea for this game, except for everything about it. So could you change it, please?
So let's talk about what the game turned out to be, and then we can circle back to the troubled development experience. So the game follows Garcia Hotspur, a Mexican demon hunter, who basically, he has a girlfriend named Paula, which is like, who picked that name? Like, Garcia Hotspur, dope name, and named after the Tottenham Hotspurs, which football team that they loved. But why is his girlfriend named Paula. She is, spoiler, literal queen of the demons.
Yeah.
And her name is Paula.
I don't know. Maybe there's some biblical reference I'm not getting.
I'm just saying,
Paula.
if I were at EA, that would have been the thing I said to change.
Well, I think Paula was an EA edition, so her in general.
Come on, Electronic Arts. Get it together. Anyway, so you've got this girlfriend, Paula, and one day she gets abducted by the Lord of the Demons, whose name is Fleming. Also a weird name, by the way.
That's funny, though.
Yes,
it's funny to call the Lord of the Demons Fleming.
That I can roll with. Paula just feels like sloppy, missed opportunity. Come on.
Well,
give me another pitch.
Paula in general is
sloppy, missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyway, you are going to battle your way through the city of the damned to save Paula from the Lord of the Demons, along with your trusty gun, motorcycle, torch, phallus demon sidekick, Johnson.
Yeah. I watched the What Happened from Matt McMuscles on YouTube on this, and he described it as like gritty Mario in its structure, which it essentially is, because it's like you go from one place to another, watch like a simulacrum of your girlfriend die horribly in various different ways, and then it's like, oh, but she's in another castle.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the structure of what you're doing in Hell.
So Shadows of the Damned is, to my understanding, not playable right now. I did not confirm if
They've
it was
announced
on PlayStation
a
3.
remaster, Grasshopper
That's
Manufacture.
where I was going.
That does not have an announced release date currently, but they are making a remaster.
Yes, they announced that this past summer. But
it
I think
might
it was
be. It's a 360 game, right?
Yeah.
It might be playable on Xbox still.
No, it was delisted from Xbox a couple of years ago. It was on Game Pass for a while and also purchasable. And then they delisted it in 2021. So I did not go through. This game did not, believe it or not, grab me enough to go through and boot up my PlayStation 3 and deal with the internet slow as mud to see if it was even listed. But it's certainly not playable on Xbox anymore, unless maybe you have the disc, I guess. Unclear if it's playable on PS3. So I say that to say, if the remaster were... I'm just thinking of our spoilers episode last week. If the remaster weren't coming, I would feel so comfortable spoiling you, because this, based on their experience making the game, would not have jumped out to me as a game that Suda and co. would be so excited to remaster, given that it was not really the game they wanted to make.
Yeah, it is interesting it sounds like Suda just really did not enjoy his time making this game, but I mean, Garcia, Hotspur, and Johnson are in Travis Strikes Back, which is one of the big multiverse thingies that they made, and they're doing a remaster. So, and despite all the developmental turmoil that the game went through, it came out okay. It got okay reviews, right?
Yeah.
It's not a total mess. It's just not the initial imagined pitch whatsoever.
No, it's just a fascinating thing to get a remaster, given that I can't imagine there are fond memories here.
Yeah, but it's Grasshopper Manufacture's doing it. They're not farming
I
it out to another company or anything. So
it's just really interesting. And
I guess it probably got delisted. Maybe they got the rights back.
I think they always owned the IP, is what it sounded like.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. Unclear. Not a lot of perfect detail. A lot of citations of a Swedish book on the Wikipedia page. I don't know if you noticed that.
I didn't.
I was this is a weird, I can't look at this. Weird thing to be cited so much. Glad the Swedes are really into Shadows of the Damned. Anyway, spoilers, I guess. But you learn that Paula is actually not just some random girl who's been abducted by the Lord of the Demons. She is, in fact, probably the Unbreakable Huntress, who was the first demon hunter who was a woman who went up against Fleming, and he was so impressed by her continuation of trying to kill him, even after she'd had all of her limbs cut off, that he made her the queen. But she's been this is the plot of Hades 2. She has been trying to escape the underworld since then and keeps getting dragged back. Anyway, no surprise, you eventually defeat Fleming, you rescue Paula, but remember how Emma said it's like Mario, where at the end of every level moment, you watch Paula get killed, and then you continue on to your next hell castle? She's pissed about that. Those weren't like hallucinations. She's been murdered in gruesome ways over and over, and she's angry that you didn't even really try to help her when that happened. So you have to calm her down. Girls before you feed them, you know. And then in the end, you're back together, planning a vacay, and Fleming gives you a call to tell you more demons are coming, which seems really polite.
You gotta respect the guy who defeated you, I guess.
This is why Gen Z keeps their phones on Do Not Disturb. Gen Z is not getting an unknown number call from Fleming, the Lord of the Demons. And they're not checking their voicemail.
Very true.
He could text. Anyway. In the game, yes, you are... It's a third-person shooter with a little bit of, like, puzzles that involve, like, clearing darkness that slowly drains your health, basically.
Yeah. You have to shoot some goat heads.
Yes. And yes, Johnson can turn into 3 different guns for combat, mostly just makes a lot of, like, genital jokes throughout the game. Which the Wikipedia summary really de-emphasized, I have to say.
Yeah?
That,
you didn't get it from Johnson?
Well, no.
No?
Not immediately. Just the fact that a character is named Johnson.
Okay, but he's your gun.
Like, I get... The girlfriend's name is Paula. It didn't seem like the names, like, a lot of thought had gone into the names here, okay? I was just like, okay, another, like, kind of generic American name. But yeah. Just a lot of, like, definitely that sort of, like, ha ha ha, I'm a teenage boy kind of humor suffused through this game.
It's, I think that, interestingly, the state that it ended up in is pretty reminiscent of No More Heroes. Mm-hmm. Just sort of in general, that sort of aspect of Suda51. In that it's got a lot of, like, genital jokes. It's treatment of... it's sort of treatment / commentary / misfired commentary, maybe, on women. It's instead of Travis, you got Garcia Hotspur. But the original pitch was apparently very Dark Soulsian, essentially. Which is fascinating to me. They wanted to make a survival horror game, essentially. Which this is not at all.
Yeah. No, not at all.
So stuff like Johnson usually being a torch that you carry around is stuff that's left over from the initial pitch. You weren't going to have, like, a gun or anything. You're just going to have, like, this torch, and there was going to be, like, never-ending darkness and stuff. So, like, the aesthetic aspect of that sort of carried through. But yeah, the initial idea was called Kuroyami, which, like you said, is darkness translated. And was sort of inspired by stuff like Franz Kafka. It was going to have designs by Kyu Hayashida, who's the mangaka of Dorohedoro, for example. So it was very much going to be more of, like, an oppressive, atmospheric sort of game was the initial pitch. But EA found it, like, a little bit too complicated. It wouldn't fit into an elevator pitch, essentially.
Yes, that was a big thing they really emphasized, the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
They talk about this a lot in these kind of post-mortem interviews.
They said, Westerners love guns. So, you know what? They're not wrong. But... so they wanted, them to have a gun, which changed the story. They didn't like the initial designs of the protagonist. Apparently, I think Suda said that, like, he sent them like 5 story treatments by the end that were all entirely different games, because they were so kind of picky in the pre-production section about what they wanted them to actually make.
I do have to read one quote from Suda about an eventual design of the gun that I do think if I was an EA executive, I might respond in the same way. So he says in one interview, for example, when Garcia took out his gun and looked through the laser sight, it was ringed with flowers. And then around the circle of flowers were these little leaping bunnies. It was very cute, but the EA team was like, what on earth is this? Those meetings felt like court interrogations. I can't deny that I might, if presented with a gun with a laser sight ringed with flowers surrounded by little leaping bunnies, that my initial reaction might also be, what on earth is this?
I think that actually shows that they're out of touch with the times, though, because if that sort of, that was like when I was in middle school, right? And that sort of like cutesy, gory aesthetic was actually really in at the time, if I remember correctly.
Suda should have just made a happy bunny.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
And stuff like Paula, what became Paula was initially he was supposed to have like a fairy companion, essentially.
Yeah.
Which EA didn't like, which I imagine was maybe tied to like the the bunny's gun.
She was going to live in the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she became like her own character. They added Johnson as like a companion character. And it became what it is.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying that the flowery gun thing couldn't have worked. I'm just saying I, too, might initially have the, what's going on here, dude?
Yeah.
Reaction.
But it just seems like there was EA was initially felt very supportive, and then as soon as they started looking at things, they were immediately non-supportive, and so there was sort of a misfire of expectation going on that perhaps the project that Mikami and Suda51 were trying to make wasn't suited to like a big AAA type company like EA.
That's going to come back. Yes, but Mikami has admitted in previous interviews that he thinks that the original idea would probably have sold even worse than what they ended up with.
Well, I mean, would it? That's about
Look,
when
you
Dark
never know.
Souls started catching on, So I don't know if I necessarily agree with that.
I'm not saying that that's God's honest truth or anything. I'm just saying that the producer, in hindsight, is like, well, would our game have sold? We also don't know.
I mean, yes, that's just a fact of life, but I don't know. I just think that is about the time that Dark Souls was happening.
Sure.
In a big way. So
yes, we could have had Souls Suda likes instead of just Souls likes. You never know. Anyway, as Emma said earlier, Shadows of the Damned was pretty well reviewed overall. It wasn't like breakout, glowing, incredible reviews, but it was pretty well reviewed. But it didn't sell. Didn't sell well at all. But despite that, remaster, I mean, it's one of those games where, yeah, we could have done this as an old game a couple of years ago, and we'd have been like, it's dead. There will never be any more of this. And now they do have the remaster coming. The announcement trailer, actually I have two trailer tidbits to bestow upon your ears. Did you watch the announcement trailer for the remaster?
I did not.
Okay, so the announcement trailer for the remaster has Grasshopper Manufacturer's community manager like on screen being like, I'm excited to talk to you about a game that we're making. And then who walks through the door but Garcia Hotspur. And Garcia Hotspur kills Grasshopper's community manager, shoots him in the head, he falls through the window. That's the trailer.
That sounds about right to me.
I'm not saying it's not right. I was just like, wow, this is... Like, who pitched this?
I don't know. It sounds like a... it sounds like a Grasshopper Manufacturer trailer, so...
Well, contrast that with the original gameplay trailer from 13 years ago or whatever that I have to quote directly, because I think more trailers should probably be corny like this again. Here it goes. Garcia Hotspur was a man who had it all. And imagine flashes of these as we go to them. A killer motorcycle. a sweet leather jacket, and a hot girlfriend. Upcoming text about to flash on the screen in big dramatic writing. From hell! Cue.
So true.
Gameplay flashes.
Sort of, I saw very funny, they did like a Twitter poll for like what sort of bonus skins do you want for Garcia Hotspur in the remaster. And the one that won is so after this made, Suda51 made like a short manga that was based on his original pitch. So Garcia Hotspur will have a skin that's the main character from that manga, as chosen by the fans.
That's a deep cut.
Yeah. It was about like the concepts, right? The other one was like longer hair concept art, Garcia Hotspur.
Got it. I thought it was just yeah.
No, they were pulling from the options were all like, here's like the 80 different iterations that Garcia Hotspur came from. Which one do you want?
Okay, great. Because I was like shocked that a Persona 5 skin didn't win.
No. It wasn't like open box suggestion, Mel.
I understand now. That's interesting. I mean, maybe I guess I'll have to check out that concept art because yeah, it feels like a deep cut. But if it's cool, who cares? He's also said that he wants to use, there's this remaster coming, but Suda has said recently that he's interested in using these characters again, perhaps in a sequel, perhaps in exploring more of the original concept, perhaps in something else entirely. So this remaster, well, it surprises me because there have to be sour feelings about this game. Definitely feels like a testing the waters situation.
Yeah.
Mikabe's been hanging around their studio per Twitter and has left Tango Gameworks. So time to get the band back together.
Didn't he open a new studio?
Maybe he did. But he certainly
I know he's
left.
not at Tango anymore, but I think he opened something new. So
fair enough. A collab.
That doesn't mean he can't work on other projects.
He was certainly sitting on their couch.
Yeah.
Something that I did notice, and I wonder if they are re-recording for the remaster or not. It's notable, right? Japanese studio making a game about a Mexican demon hunter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, like, Suda does this a lot, right? Like, Suda and Mikame's previous collaboration, Killer 7, was like a noir assassin game set in America with like wildly diverse cast, which is fascinating. But Garcia is voiced by Steve Bloom of Cowboy Bebop and many other voice acting fame, and I don't think that's how we would do it now. He's like doing an accent.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It was pretty of the times. So.
No, and that's not to really. I mean, other than the finger pointing of, we should have known better then, too. But given that people didn't know better, that is definitely of the times. But I am curious with the remaster coming out now, if they're going to stick with that, or if they're re-recording audio at all, or who knows.
Who knows?
But yeah, I looked it up because I was curious. I was like, oh, like, did they, like, this guy is doing an accent. Did they have someone who is culturally appropriate to this? And the answer is no. I do wonder how this game's gonna hit now.
People still love Suda.
They do.
It's very like I said, it's very No More Heroes, so I think it'll probably find its crowd pretty easily. True.
It's just not my crowd.
No. I would have been much more interested in his original pitch than I was in this game.
Well, screw you, EA.
Speaking of EA,
they
didn't really. Immortals of Aveum, 2023 FPS game from Ascendant Studios, which is a new company made up of The head is like a guy who worked on a lot of Call of Duties. There's
Dead
other
Space.
people from in Dead Space, other people from Activision, some former Telltale devs apparently.
Yeah, they really vacuumed up that when Telltale closed, they were like, we just decided to hire all those people.
Yeah, basically. And published by EA under their EA Originals line, which is usually like their more like smaller scale game.
It Takes Two is an EA original.
Yeah, and like Unravel and stuff. But Immortals of Aveum is definitely at a larger scale in terms of effort than most of the other games under their Originals line. In this case, it's not really that EA did anything to this game in the same way that they had like extreme oversight over Shadows of the Damned. It's more that they didn't really do anything for this game.
Other than perhaps give them access to too much money.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember seeing this announced at various conferences. I remember seeing trailers. And it's unfortunately, I mean, it's an FPS, a magic FPS, but still an FPS. So it was never destined to hit with me. But something about all of it feels like it's just designed to just slide right off your brain once you see it.
So it was interesting to me because this is not something that I would guess, that there are not a lot of magic FPSs out there. Which apparently they're just hard to make. I don't know, for some reason that surprised me. And like thinking about it, I was like, oh, of course there aren't. But it feels like there should be.
I think there was something called Hexen a while ago. There's some other game coming out where I think it's an FPS where you have both magic and a gun. Like Witchfire, maybe? I don't know. I would have to double check that. But yeah, there's not a lot of magic-based shooters at all. I don't even think there's a lot of magic-based third-person shooters that you could call it.
And it came out of the original idea. I watched a very like hype up our studio head promo video about this game. But Britt Robbins, the founder of the studio, basically while he was working on Call of Duty, he was like, I had this flash where I imagined like, what would it be like if these were like wizards instead, basically. And that from there, Shadows of Aveum was born.
Did you say Shadows of Aveum?
Did I say Shadow? I'm a nightmare. Immortals of Aveum. Disaster.
See what I mean by slide off the brain, though.
Yeah.
It's super interesting to me to have this like reaction to it because like there's nothing wrong with like the concept of it in any way that like I'm looking at it. It's just like there's nothing sticky there either.
It's the kind of game, it really struck me of, if this game had come out, maybe not 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, on like the PS3 or the PS2, I feel like it'd be the kind of thing that people would be clamoring for, you know, where's my remastered version of this? Bring it back.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about the crowded release landscape that it came into and how much or not so much that may have played into the fate of this game. But certainly this idea in an era in which there was perhaps more space for these kinds of mid-tier single-player type experiences, I feel like there could have been a following for this that existed in an earlier time, or an appetite for this in an earlier time that I think has shifted away.
Anyway, for a brief summary of the game, it takes place in, I don't know if there's a name for the world in general, or if they're just country names, but in this
Aveum,
world,
I thought.
Isn't that one of the, like, that's like the country, right?
The five kingdoms of
Aveum, and then there's the kingdom of Rosharn, but I don't know if the planet has a name.
Magic world.
In this magic world, there's like 3 types of magic. There's red, blue, and green magic. Most people can only use one type of magic. which have various different effects. Like red is like, I don't know, it's like violence, I guess. Blue
They're
is
called
sort of like
chaos. Red is chaos. Blue is force. Green is life.
yeah, and sort of do what you'd expect them to do. And there's this sort of thief, Jack, who ends up sort of accidentally wrapped up in a fight between the last kingdom of Aveum, Lucium, and the kingdom of Rasharn, who is like invading all of these different kingdoms. And in the sort of chaos, it's discovered that Jack with just the K, by the way, is a triarch Magnus. So he can use all 3 different types of magic, which is pretty rare in this world. So he's sort of drafted into the war over like who gets to have control of magic. There's like this subplot of like the use of magic in general is like opening this wound in the center of Aveum, which is like just like a big pit. And apparently whenever you do more magic, the wound opens up more. And so there's just like a fight going on. And lots of stuff happens. That's my summary.
Magic.
Your enemies are much cooler looking. They have cool armor and masks and stuff that I read a whole interview about. They talked about designing like the different types of armor and stuff.
But overall, as Emma said, well, it's really interesting to me that all over when they talk about this, and not to just be tempted to do the opposite of our What is an Indie Game podcast from a little while ago, right? But all over their promo for this game and talking about the studio, just everything, they're like, this is a AAA game. We're a AAA studio. We're one of only a few independent AAA studios. And like on one hand, it's published by EA, right? And so you can make the argument that having EA as the publisher, might put you into a AAA category. I don't know that I'd want to argue that like It Takes Two is a AAA game, but like maybe we could. But it's weird. It's not clear to me what they mean when they say that.
Well, what is notable about this game is it is I think the first, essentially, except for maybe Fortnite, it's the first game to ship that used Unreal Engine 5, for example. So it is quite cutting edge in terms of technology that they were using to
perhaps too
build
cutting
it.
edge.
Perhaps too cutting edge, yes. But essentially what they're trying to say that they're making a game like at the scale, right, of what you'd expect from, Sony or whatever, any other game you think of when you think of
Call of
AAA.
Duty.
Call of Duty, I guess. It's got celebrities in it, right?
Yes, everyone's reviews were like, Gina Torres
Torres. Yeah.
Says those words.
Yeah.
Like, she sure is not afraid to say all the proper nouns.
She sure is.
Game.
So I think they more mean like sort of a cutting edge sort of graphical style is what they mean by AAA.
It's just a weird, in the same way as I feel weird about indie. Like, it's weird to me that these things that refer really to business structures are becoming shorthand for like, what do the graphics look like?
Sure. For what it's worth, after the game released, their CEO did go on like a interview tour, Brett Robbins, just talking pretty frankly about like the various mistakes that were made in like the creation and release of this title. And part of it was he does think that their marketing was a misfire in terms of communicating what the game was. Like, not just like the AAA stuff, but like at some point it caught on that there was like Call of Duty with magic, and that's not actually a particularly good reflection of what the game is. It has a lot more RPG elements than Call of Duty. It's partially a Metroidvania, right? You return back when you get new abilities so that you can open up new spaces and get more things to do. So it felt like, it sounded like he thought that there was just like a failure to fully explain what the game was, that perhaps the company, after working on it for so long, established their own shorthands, right? That then became like the public facing shorthands that were not actually very useful for saying what the game was and who would appreciate playing it.
But here's the thing, is that not EA's job?
I know, yeah. It just seems like EA took what they said and didn't, like, massage it in any particular way.
This game sold really badly.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of factors to point to and a lot of things to, like, unpack around that, right? But first things first, they talked about themselves as a AAA game, and, like, hey, I guess maybe this isn't even a AAA budget anymore, but they were certainly operating, there's a lot of money sloshing around. After the fact, somebody came out with the, like, $85 million for development, $40 million for marketing, $125 million overall budget. And that's just a heavy lift, all right? That's a heavy lift for a game that is a single player, no microtransaction experience. So it certainly makes it trickier. It puts the bar for success that much higher, and the bar for immediate success that much higher. So that's in play. Something they blame a lot in talking about this is that this game was originally supposed to release in late July, and they had to delay it by a month for some final polish. Not a, probably, grand scheme of things, seems like something that wouldn't be a big deal, right? And I think it's disingenuous, given the reviews this game got, to really point to that, given that, other games certainly broke out far beyond expectations in this time period. But by being delayed into August, it put them right in a release window with Starfield, with, I can't remember what the other one was that was, like, expected, and also with Baldur's Gate just, like, sucking up all the oxygen in the room.
There was a really interesting, I listened to some of Remap Radio's interview with,
they liked the game overall, mostly.
And, like, generally the gameplay was received relatively positively. It was mostly the sort of tone of the story, which is quite sort of light Marvel movie, I guess, is a good way to describe it. Seemed to be more divisive. Yeah, but anyway, I was listening to the interview, and they were talking a little bit about, like, it's very hard for a new original IP to get a lot of press coverage now, because there are less, and this is something I've noticed too, just like going to Kotaku or Polygon, they don't review a lot of games anymore.
Yeah.
There's like a few big releases that they release like one game review a month or something like that. They just don't review indies anymore, like, ever. And so it's very hard when you got, like, a lot of games releasing in a short period of time. If you're, like, the new original one, of course writers are going to be working on their Starfield review or their Baldur's Gate 3 review or whatever, and not on their Immortals of Aveum review. And if you are an established series already too, the editor-in-chief might already have a person that they always call up to write reviews of these titles because they're, like, the resident review writer for that, right? Whereas something like the Call of Duty guy, whereas something like Immortals will just sort of be up for grabs to anyone, and you might get somebody who is, like, into it and likes the kind of game that you're putting out, or you might get someone who just isn't, right? And not just from a personal preference side. You might get someone who's more predisposed to like it versus someone who's less predisposed to like it, and don't really have very much control over that as a game developer.
the blanket caveat over all of this, or the blanket talk this thing over all of this, that like the fact that we are even talking about like this is reviewing certainly from the publisher's perspective, and the fact that this is like the main way in which we might talk about game reviews of like, oh, did you get someone who's predisposed to like this or not?
Well, I do mostly
itself.
mean like it's just hard to get reviews written of it, which does suck, right?
Yeah.
There should be enough of a beating heart of games press that lots of games can get reviews and talked about and stuff, even some of the bigger ones. And unfortunately, we're just not in that space anymore. Ascendant is also in a difficult place where, because of its like independence and its general size, they're like a one game at a time studio.
Yeah.
Right.
There are only about 100 people, and that was a major scale up.
Yes.
And they're not 100 people anymore. They were only about 100 people.
Layoffs pretty soon after the release.
3 weeks.
Because on being a one game company, it means that if this game doesn't sell, then you don't have money to retain those people anymore. They also talked a little bit on Remap that like when you're at a big company, you know, like Activision, the amount of people that you need on a project as you're working on it will naturally fluctuate, right? They started off pretty small when they were working on the pre-production phase of this, and then scaled up as production continued. But since they don't have another game in the pipeline, right, he's back in like the pitching phase, which I can tell you from my job, it's not friendly out there for pitches right now. But it means that you don't actually, like the Remap people brought up, like, wouldn't these layoffs really have happened regardless, like a number of them at least, because those people don't have anything to do, right? You don't have anything for those people to do once this game is shipped. Because you don't need QA necessarily, unless you're moving them into a different role, which you can do at a big company, right? Oh, we don't need you on this project right now. Let's move you to our other project, right, that we're also working on. But you can't do that if you're a one game at a time studio. So it seems there's like a combination of like, there isn't really work anymore because we shipped this game, and also this game did really poorly, so we can't even retain you and try to move you to a different role or anything like that.
And I'll note that, you know, the Ascendant was included some discussion of this in a big IGN report on layoffs in games semi-recently. And I do want to note that one of the anonymous developer sources does really call out Ascendant as being a pretty good employer, right? They talk in one of these quotes that, like, you know, there's all these layoffs happening at Embracer that are really about maximizing your profit and loss for your balance sheet, for your investors. But here they do call it Ascended as a place where people were paid well. When the pandemic moved them remote, they then decided to stay remote because they had hired people all over the place to take advantage of talent, that the crunch at the end was minimal and you weren't expected to work overtime before that, and that they treated QA well. They actually hired junior staff, which is really hard right now. So like a lot of things here that's like, oh, and like notably, right, like many things about like that process was great. In some ways, if you look at Immortals of Aveum on paper, it's the kind of like shorter original IP single player experience, no microtransactions, no grindy grind that people say that they want.
Yeah.
And none of that. I mean, it doesn't make a difference if your game only reviews okay.
Yeah.
Now, this is the kind of game that I feel like probably would have sold fine with these kinds of reviews in like 2009.
Yeah. It's also got the hit of, I think it sold for a full $70.
It did.
And our current gaming culture is very fixated on money per time, right?
Yeah, this is about a 20-hour experience.
A short game. Yeah, which people say they want, again. But when it's $70 versus like, oh, I could buy this 100-hour game for $70, and therefore I'm maximizing my content per dollar, which, we could discuss like the whole $70 price increase and like the complicated realities of that, of like, yeah, maybe it does need to go up, but also this money isn't actually going to the developers, it's just going to the execs some more. So, but it certainly wasn't doing itself any favors, even though it's like a short experience that people want. By selling at the full price, it certainly deterred people.
But it is another thing that deterred people is that to play this on PC, it requires really dramatic specs for your computer. Yeah. I don't understand gaming specs, so none of the like various GPU things meant anything to me, but The Verge said that based on Steam's hardware survey, probably less than 9% of gaming PCs actually had the recommended capacity.
Yeah, it's the unfortunate result of being on the cutting edge of Unreal 5, right? So that they have all of these different things happening, right? And it's very impressive from like a digital foundry point of view, but it's not actually very appreciable from the standard consumer point of view.
Yeah, there was the Verge did an interview with the CTO Mark Maratea, where he talks about the idea of like, we've designed this game to future-proof, right? So like, yeah, you might not be able to play it now, but as we all get better computers, in a couple of years, it's not going to look like crap. Which is an interesting strategy that, like, I can see the value of that if you had other sources of revenue, perhaps. Yeah. Oh, he also, I didn't love his quote where he was like, in another game, a big craggy wall is actually just a craggy texture, and it's flat. And we made the real wall. And I was like, was that a good use of your time?
Yeah. That's always a question. I read through, they did like an interview with Digital Foundry where they talked about like the different, I just sort of skimmed it because I talk about stuff skimming off my brain. Yeah. But like just talking about all the different like tech and stuff that they use and like how detailed everything is. And it's like, I don't know. I've been playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth lately, and sometimes I see rocks that look like crap, and I'm like, good for you. You know? Yeah. This rock, in fact, did not have to look good. It could look like crap, and that's fine. Oh, one last thing. In their free update that was in November, they did like a collab with Mr. Beast. So they added like a new boss fight, the Beast of something. It doesn't sound like Mr. Beast, it doesn't look like Mr. Beast, but he does drop a lot of money. So that's how you know that he's Mr. Beast.
That is Mr. Beast.
Yeah.
They did apparently that update where they had the trial and they cut the price. That the CEO did an interview with Games Industry Biz where he was like, "We saw a ton more sales, right? It really worked." But I do think, yeah, ultimately, there's just not room for games that are like pretty good.
Yeah.
And especially, and you know, you're stuck in this pipeline too, right? Where it's like, man, it's crazy that you spent $125 million on this game, right? And like, couldn't you have just made the graphics a little worse and saved some money and maybe made your budget a little easier to hit? But on the other hand, if you do that, like, you sacrifice the graphics, right? So it's this like constant, like, you know, chasing your own tail, eating yourself like as you go, or a Boris of like, you have to keep spending more money to make money, but
for what it's worth, you know, beyond like the fancy walls or whatever that they made or whatever, ultimately it is a game that does ask for a more realistic look, right? The concept of it being like this fantasy world. They've got these very elaborately masked antagonists. You've got celebrities in it, right? It's like the magic system in particular. You're making a first-person shooter, right? So you want to see his hands doing the various different things. So the concept itself does ask for that, right? It's easy to say like, oh, you could have just made it less good looking, right? But then it just would have been less good looking.
Yeah. And that's the exact problem. But on that note, it's time to mash.
It's time to mash.
Okay, it has to be published by EA and do kind of bad. It has to get screwed up by EA somehow.
Yeah. Shooter. Of some sort.
shooter for sure. Kind of interesting that the first game is like you've got a gun in a fantasy world, and the other one is your magic is your gun.
In a fantasy world, you might say.
I know also in a fantasy world, but like, you know what I mean? I was like, there's guns in one. The one that is more Call of Duty doesn't have guns, and the one that has a gun is, yeah.
Yeah. There's something to I do like the concept of like you're using this magic in Immortals of Aveum, and it's like opening up a wound in the world, right? As more that you do it. I think that could play really nicely with like a notion of hell, right? Of you're stuck in this sort of like vicious cycle of like you have to use these abilities to fight the demon hordes that are coming out of this hole in the ground, but the more that you use the magic abilities, the more this like hole opens up and more demons come. So you're sort of there's like, then there's something you could bring in a little bit of like the Kuroyami like sort of overwhelmingness, right? Of like,
yeah,
you're sort of in this cycle that like you can't get out, and just slowing down the world's end, right? Versus actually stopping it.
How does this game end?
The world ends. We go for the downer ending, I think.
I don't know if Westerners like that.
They don't like downer endings?
I'm EA here being like, I don't know about that.
No, in Immortals, there's like they managed to things. It's not a sad ending in Immortals. I won't spoil it if you want to go play it. Yeah. But they live, and they set up a sequel tease. So there's that. So maybe you could do something where like you find another solution or whatever that closes the hole up for good. But your little demon buddy must leave forever into the hole. It's quite sad.
I could support that. This feels, though, like it... Is it a linear experience? Is it a roguelike? I know neither of these games are roguelikes. I'm just imagining the enemies get harder and harder and the hole gets bigger and bigger as, like...
Maybe it's more, like, mission structured.
Yeah.
So you have, like, you go on different missions, I guess.
I could see that.
And maybe you can get more abilities and just sort of bring in, like, the light Metroidvania stuff. If you go back to old levels, you might be able to get to, like, extra bonus areas or whatever.
And does the amount that I use my magic abilities actually in the game actually have an impact? Or is it just a, like...
I think we keep it to a narrative thing. That sounds complicated.
Yeah, I was like, I don't feel like it can't. I do feel like there is maybe a game, but it would be more of like an arcade shooter, I think.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is what we want here. That's fine. That's good. I mean, probably, I guess that means that we would have to tie it to abilities of, like, you must have, like, a limited amount of, like, superpowered magic ability thing that you can use in any given level. Or something like that. Mm-hmm. Your commander has told you that for strategic reasons you can only use Ultra Magic Burst twice.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense of having, like, you have different abilities, but you have, like, really powerful ones that you can only use. Like, we don't want to take away, like, all your combat options. Right?
No. I'm just saying there's some, like, limited, like, highly strategic big things.
Yeah.
That you need to make the choice of when you're going to use them.
Yeah. I like that.
There we go. That's a no-brainer.
It kind of worked, you know?
I don't think people will buy it.
I would. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, we talked about, like, these didn't sell very well and whatever, but they've got, like, cool ideas in there, right?
Yeah.
They've got cool things to pull from.
EA will take care of the marketing for us.
Sure they will.
Well, listeners, have you too been wronged by Electronic Arts?
Haven't we all?
To financial compensation. Have we sold you on either of these games, or are these games you're like, heck yeah, I'm going to play those now? Will I ever be able to say the names of these games correctly again? Shadows of the Immortals. If you have thoughts on this or anything else this week, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog, featuring a long-running series, Clickbait Boyfriend, and Split Screen. But perhaps most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, you should subscribe. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts. Listen to, subscribe, give a like for Talk This. Next week, it's 6 Weeks in Gaming. Woo! Have I played any games other than Like a Dragon? Unclear! Have to go back and figure out. Probably not really. Haha, look forward to it.
That's okay. We'll really just have, like, Emma talks about Rebirth for a little bit, and then we have deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive into Emma's Fix-It.
I'll hold myself back.
Deep dive into my detailed ranking of these games.
Yeah. My karaoke tier list.
Yes. But in 2 weeks, what's the haps?
In 2 weeks, for our old game, we'll be talking about Etrian Odyssey. And for our new game, we'll be talking about The Expanse, a Telltale series.
Wow. All right. Following up former Telltale with new Telltale.
A Telltale series that's not made by Telltale.
A Telltale joint.
Exactly.
And then in 3 weeks, it'll be our post-PAX episode.
Yeah.
So look forward to our thoughts on PAX.
I'm a little worried about it.
I am too. No one came back. The
I'm
schedule looks light.
Not feeling the anticipation, really.
Should I bring my little stool?
I'm going to. I will certainly be bringing my little stool.
I probably will. So look for us sitting on our little pop-up stools at PAX if you're going to be there. That's it for this week's show. Thanks for listening. Emma, sign us off.
This week, I hope that your tortured, dead demon girlfriend is exactly where you think she is.